Well, good morning and welcome to our first in a series of 10 weeks in regard to the subject of how to interpret Scripture. And of course, our time this morning, this is only one part, and it will be in concert with looking at the text of this morning's sermon. And actually, we'll have table time to discuss the text and hopefully apply what we're learning through these short talks over the next 10 weeks to better equip ourselves to be interpreters of Scripture. And so first of all, we're looking at this long word, this theological word of hermeneutics. And hermeneutics is just simply our means by which we interpret the Scripture, actually our methodology. Now, fact one is that every exchange in which you and I engage, it requires some level of interpretation. If you are hearing my voice right now, you are interpreting at this very moment. Fact number two is that your interpretation at any given moment is influenced by your current state. And your current state, my current state this morning, is what has happened prior to this meeting time right here in this place. So if you were looking for the shoes of your little one, trying to find, hurried and trying to get in the car to get to church this morning, that has influence. Your conversation with your spouse on your way to meeting here this morning has influence on your interpretation of how you're hearing my voice. So the question then is, as we look at this, is what type of communication method best equips to accurately interpret? And of course, the answer to that question is face-to-face communication. And of course, that sets the stage for biblical interpretation in the fact that we do not have that luxury of being face-to-face with the Apostle John as he's writing his gospel. We have to look at what John has written in order to derive the meaning from that text. Let's take a little closer look at this process. First of all, God's been active throughout all of creation, since the very beginning, in speaking. John chapter 1 talks about this, how the Word was with God from the very beginning and reaching out and speaking. And in the early verses of the gospel says, to as many as received him, that is the Word, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe on his name. This has been throughout all of time. In verse 14 of John chapter 1, the Word was given a face, and that face is the incarnate Word, Jesus Christ. And so God has been involved throughout time, expressing and speaking through the writers of Scripture, and in other ways as well. So, to look at this process, first of all, we have an event that took place at some point in time. And every event has two aspects. One is the occasion itself, and the other is the context of which it is happening. Close following that process, and generally it is a close relationship in regard to time, that the author writes about this event. Now, the author may be part of that context, but the author also has his context of which he is writing. There is a purpose behind what he is writing. This is so true of the four gospel accounts. There were stories circulating among the early church, the very early church, and the various authors of the gospel accounts took these and organized them in such a way in order to tell their story of their purpose in depicting the gospel account. So there's an author and his context, occasion, and context as well. Now, 2,000 years later, we come along, and now we're reading back through what the author has written, his context about what he is writing about, and into the event itself. Again, using the Gospels as an example of this. We're looking through all of these contexts and occasions, trying to understand the intent of what is written. Transposed over this entire process are lenses, and lenses over the entire process. The event had lenses transposed. The author has lenses, intentional and unintentional, of what he is writing about. And now our lenses are quite different in how we are looking back through all of these lenses. We too, the reader, have lenses that we read the scriptures. Now, as we look at this idea, we are all in different places. What I've introduced is the idea that we all have lenses to some degree. It's not like we can get rid of our lenses. We have lenses whether we are aware of those or not. Acknowledging the fact that we have lenses is a step in the right direction. So as we think about this whole subject of the reality of lenses, there are various responses. The first one here, wow, with all these lenses, how am I able to understand what the Bible is teaching me? Well, we can look at that. In this regard, that it is my belief that God is well okay with the fact that these lenses exist, that he is well capable of working within that context to communicate what we need to understand through the Holy Scriptures. The second question, there are things in the Bible that seem weird to me, but I've been afraid to pose my questions, so I just suppress what has been bothering me. It doesn't take long to start to read some things that just don't seem to jive. And unfortunately, much of our context is that it's hard to bring these things up because it depicts maybe doubt in what God is saying. I would encourage us to bring these things up, to start talking about these things in the context of dialogue in order to gain understanding. Some of us may be here and somewhat open to the idea that I may be wearing lenses, which may have influence on how I read and understand the Scripture. I would view this as a step in the right direction. Lastly, the Bible is clear what God requires, and thus what we need to do is just do it. Well, that is true. Maybe some of us are here from that perspective as well. Our takeaway this morning is this: lenses exist. That is the takeaway for this first time together. And we are all in different places in regard to what we do with this reality, thus depicted by the slide just prior to this one. And it's a good idea to assess where I am in regard to this. In doing so, I am then able to discern what to do next. Take a look, and thanks for coming this morning.